All right. Good evening, everyone. We'll get started. So primarily the focus of today's webinar and topic would be on season planning. And at the second half or post that, we will also continue on to looking at specifically a few of the recent races and just do some sort of post-race analysis. Some of you can jump in with your any recent race itself and we can use that. But I also have about 4 or 5 key points from some of the recent Goa triathlon and also a few other races based on which I've seen a particular pattern of people which I want to just sort of address that, which I think will be quite valuable for us to just learn from that and move forward. Okay. Any particular topics or questions? Just feel free to put it out on the chat. I will take them as I receive them. And in case it just needs to wait for a few minutes because of bringing the discussion to a certain logical step, I'll do that. But feel free to put them out there on the chat. Okay. Season planning. So we all understand what a season is. It might not start from January to December. It could be different for different people depending upon what they're looking at. But broadly speaking, it's about just having a medium-term view. In addition to just thinking about the next 3 months, we try to look at sort of 6 to 12 months time frame as a season. And one of the first steps for us to do will be to sort of jot down, literally take pen to paper. That's what I would do for myself. And also, what works best is to take some time and think about what your potential goals can be. Yeah, and that's something just to see what our key goals for the season are. It could be a race, or it could just be a certain goal. It doesn't have to necessarily be related to a race. In most cases, it turns out to be, hey, this is my key race, and everything else building up towards it. So one of the things which I notice, which people end up bringing sometimes when people reach out to me for training and come through, they've already lined up about 6 races over the next 8 months. And when I ask them what are your goals, they usually give me a long list of races as opposed to what do we want to achieve. So we spend some time, talk through it, and then we figure out, all right, it's not like I'm asking you to pick one out of the 8, but ideally speaking, I wouldn't have gone and signed up for all those 8 races, right? So that's step number 1. As much as possible, just think through, have discussion with the coach, or at least just spread them out so that there is enough training blocks between races. So when we plan the season, key thing is, hey, what do I want to do for the season? If it's a half Ironman, for that, hey, that's my key race, and everything else should be building up towards that. And we don't have to race too much just to prepare for that race. Just race enough before the key race and allow enough space and training blocks between the races. That's very important. Otherwise, I as a coach, or anybody else for that matter as a coach, will find it extremely hard to slot good enough training blocks, one towards your key race, but also to do justice to whatever other races we've signed up for. Hope that makes sort of sense in terms of what we're trying to do. And there is no magic number to say sign up only this races. But key thing is just treat at least a 12-week block and try to have one sort of key objective in that 12-week block. Anything lesser than that would be hard for us to plan. Let me just take an example of maybe myself and also a few other of our trainees, just to sort of look through. I mean, we have people, let's say end of the year, they want to do a full Ironman, and right now they might not be in a position to maybe even race a half Ironman. So we build up slowly, but that doesn't mean we go sign up for 5 triathlons building up to that main one. There's a lot of things we can do in training itself to simulate sort of the race volume, the race intensity, see how the body and the training is responding, and then make that through. So key thing is think about your key race, and every other race you do should be supporting that and shouldn't be impeding that race or the training. And you can have a running goal and a triathlon goal. It's very common, but don't just have races just too close to each other. Trying to run the Mumbai Marathon and then a week or two after that trying to do your key triathlon race where your legs are not yet recovered, again, is not a good example. You might have to just earlier in the season choose, hey, what do I go for? Maybe I just do an easy marathon, or maybe I just do a half marathon and then focus back on the triathlon. So that's something for us to consider. All right. One of the other thing also is, taking myself as an example, for this year, I'm just focusing on trying to do some Olympic distance races. Until last month, I'd never done an Olympic distance race, even though I'd done, 20 odd Ironman races. And that for me was a difference. So my training is now tailored towards an Olympic distance race. Don't be afraid to take time off from big workouts. I mean, whenever if people don't run, there are lots of people who join my running program and they said, if I don't run 30-kilometer long runs every Sunday, I'm going to lose my fitness or things. Now, not the case. So let us not be afraid to just build up gradually or focus on some things for a few months and then build up later on closer to the race. We don't need to be training high volume all through the year. If we do, we're never going to get the results we want. So that's another thing which I've noticed, that people get a bit nervous when they see some sort of high intensity but maybe low volume for a few weeks or even sometimes for a couple of months, and they feel they're going to lose out their fitness. Obviously, as a coach, we look at what foundation or what base they have. If they have a good running base or a cycling base, we can afford to back off and then pick it up again. And it's always something which you'll notice that your performance. So that's another thing which I notice a fair amount from people who get a bit nervous when they start not doing enough, even though the race is 8 months from now. They're like, I'm not riding 150, 200 Ks or whatever it is. We don't need to. If you've not yet built, and for confidence reasons and for building up conditioning, we will at some stage do it, but it doesn't have to be all high all through the year. All right. The other thing is there will always be some supporting races, a few social sort of community-based races where, because your training partner is going along, or your group of people whom we train with, or maybe it's your company run or anything like that, there will always be runs like that, and that's perfectly fine. Runs or even whatever events. So the key thing is to choose your races as a priority A race. Your priority A race, you can't have more than sort of 2 key priority A races, especially big ones in a year. You can have 3 if there are shorter races, maybe half marathons and half Ironmans. I think you can definitely have more than 2. But otherwise, just look to see what your key goals are and choose 2 key priority A races, and then a few priority B races where you will still go hard in every race, but it might just be supporting your priority A race, and we may not peak at the right time, right? The whole aspect of season planning is just go into a build mode and base building, and then peak at the right time, race, and then sort of recover a bit, then again build up again. That gives us an opportunity if you space out your priority A races properly. So always have a discussion and find out before signing up for races, which I think a lot of you people have do that. So thanks for that, and continue to do that, because that gives us a bit of a room. And there will always be, as I said, priority B and priority C races are races for which you don't necessarily taper or do anything specific. If it's a Sunday race, you'll still train pretty hard until Wednesday, Thursday, even Friday. Maybe Saturday just go easy or a rest day, and then go race on Sunday. It could be a small race, small from a importance and relevance perspective. The distances could still be based on what you want. We treat it more as a training day, have a good race, and then we try to, then we just try to train through it. We're not going to just taper, peak, and then, not too many ups and downs. So that's one thing to, keep in mind while we look at the season planning. Let me just pause to see if you have any thoughts or any questions or anything around this topic. You want to unmute yourself, or you can chat, type in a question in the chat. Okay. Okay. One sort of common question which I also get is, when people are training for a half Ironman or a full Ironman, how do I balance my running goals or maybe cycling specific goals, right? So that's one common goal. So that's what we do is we try to see if your key triathlon race or goal is months away, we can afford to sort of put, let's say in this case, let's take, you want to go after a good full marathon or a half marathon, and but you also want to continue to train for an upcoming triathlon. We can certainly do that, and that's quite common. And the way to look at it is, we don't necessarily stop cycling or swimming, but primarily we look at sort of putting that not on a maintenance mode where we don't do enough, but we just focus a little more on running, right? So instead of just doing 2 or 3 runs, maybe we start doing 3 or 4 runs. We continue to cycle, we continue to swim, but maybe we try to structure the workout such that you're running a little more on fresh legs compared to fatigue legs. When I say fatigue legs, going for a big ride and then doing a brick run, you will continue to get sort of, stronger for what is needed for an Ironman, but the conditioning needed for, or a triathlon, but the conditioning needed to run a fresh marathon or a half marathon, when I say fresh, a straight through just a running event, we will want to get a bit more stronger. So structuring workouts and also placing them suitably such that you're running reasonably on fresh legs, which means we are able to push ourselves a bit more, get better, and look through it. That's something. And again, for a marathon, you won't need too many things. 6 to 8 weeks before the marathon, if you can start to just wind down a bit on the cycling and the swimming, push up the run volume, because you've always been running, just that it needs a bit more focus. And yeah, I remember, again, coming back to a little bit to season plan and goals, I always wanted to qualify for Boston, but I once I started to do triathlon, I was just focusing so much on swim, cycle, and run. I never got to sort of, run a fast marathon. And I remember I after after an Ironman, I sort of took sort of 6 weeks. I think there was the first week of December, there was a full Ironman. This was, I think, 2013 or 14, 13. And then I did the Mumbai Marathon in January. We had about 8 weeks. And at that time, I focused a lot on the run, and still did cycling and swimming, but more so just to stay in touch with it and maintain a bit of conditioning, but quite heavy focus towards running, and went after a hard time to go after the Boston qualification time, and trying to focus a little more on that. So that's something which worked well. So that's something which gives us enough time, and we don't need too much. So I think common question, can I have my running goals and triathlon goals? Definitely yes. Just plan ahead and structure the workouts and follow that. Certainly can do. Another question is, how much time does it take to migrate from a half to a full? Someone doesn't have a strong training base. So I presume you're referring to a triathlon here or a marathon. I presume it's a triathlon, given on the question. So yeah, look, this will depend upon If you don't have a strong training base, then it's good to build up that base. If I have to put a number to it, I would say after you have done your first half Ironman, think of it this way: a full Ironman is about 3 times harder. Might not take you 3 times the time, but it just is 3 times harder. And the biggest thing which will come back to you is what sort of running base we have, especially because that's the one which takes a little more time to build up. Cycling, you can build up pretty well. Swimming, I mean, depending on the fitness, the speed required will take a long time for swimming. But if you're able to swim, 1.5 to 2 Ks, whatever it is, 1.9 Ks for the half, in most probable in training you would have trained that or close to it. Stepping that to a 3.8 is not going to take a lot of months. But if you don't have a good running base, for us to have a good full Ironman without injuries and building up properly, I think you should definitely give yourself 6 to 8 months for you to make sure that you're not pushing yourself too much. If you already ran a marathon and already have a good little bit of a cycling base, then that can be a little more on the lower side of the 6 to 8. But otherwise, that would be the right way to approach without necessarily rushing into it. Because one of the things which I've seen happen is you try to spike up the volume too much, and then that's where the injuries start to happen and things. So I definitely, especially if it's your first one, give yourself at least 6 months before you're full, and that is really stretching it, provided you already have a good running base or cycling base. If you don't, you then need to first, don't put a timetable on it. Go maybe do a marathon or build up your run conditioning, then decide. Don't sign up for a race and then say, sign up for a race, now let's make it happen. You can always sign up for a race much ahead if you feel the conditioning is there, but don't put yourself on a time clock, on a target. As much as everyone needs goals to wake up every day, if you sign up for a race, it keeps you motivated, all that is fine. But definitely don't go sign up very prematurely, and then every working session, every training workout, you put a lot of pressure onto yourself. And you start analyzing it too much. My run is not improving, my swim's not happening, how will it do? It just weighs you down. It just makes the entire, first of all, the joy of training and enjoyment just goes out, which is not good. But the main other thing is you're no longer relaxed, you're no longer focused on what needs to be done. So that's something I think best, keep your training and then suitably just sign up when the time is right. And nowadays there are so many races all through the year. Don't rush into it. Arun, another question. Choosing races, right? So we obviously are talking about a season plan. How do I select races, especially based on course, weather, and things? A very common question to me, or the most asked question, I would say, when people want to do a half Ironman or a full Ironman, they tell me, "Hey, which one is an easy one?" I tell them, well, if all of them are still the same distance, 3.8 Ks, 180K rides, 42.2 marathon running. Yes, some of them could be a bit hard, a bit hilly and things like that. So it does make sense to evaluate that. But don't forget about other things you need to keep in mind while selecting a race. I mean, in this context, I'm looking at a triathlon. I'll come to the running later on. See about how much it costs for you to get there. Is it a place you would like to spend some more time as holiday along with your family? Do you maybe have friends or family already in that particular city, country, which might come over to support you, or you might be able to stay with them? It just helps to have people around you. Think about all those things. Think about the schedule, what month works for you, all that, before looking at whether it's a hilly course or what the temperature is. So definitely keep the course conditions, environment, and weather into consideration, but don't put that right up there. There are a lot of other things, and just look at it a bit more holistically and give enough weightage to all factors, especially triathlon being an expensive sport and things, it always adds up. So it's important to see what place you could go, what suits you, and is that the right time of the year for you to go in terms of your training? Will you be able to train properly? Will you be able to take holidays building up to that? And other things. So just look for all those parameters in addition to conditions. And when it comes to conditions, for example, let's take Malaysia. I've done that race 3 times, and each time I knew that it will be hard. I knew how rolling or what the course will be, which means I train suitably, right? You don't show up on the race day and suddenly realize, oh my God, who put this hill here? And things like that, right? So you already know what the course is. You know the course is going to be hilly. You know it's going to be hot, and you know that beforehand, and you're giving yourself enough time to train for it. So if it's going to be a bit rolling and hilly, we go train suitably and be ready for it. If it's going to be a bit more hot, we try to train suitably, have a clear nutrition and hydration strategy, and we execute it. We find out from people who have done the race, we find out what works, we try that in training, we do our runs maybe a little later in the day. There are lots of things you can do to train suitably. So keep those in mind when it comes to triathlons and Ironmans. When it comes to running, usually, yes, people who are training in very cool conditions, like especially if you have people living, let's say in the east coast of US, and they are training through winter, and then they suddenly fly out to do a race in hot area. It's not going to be an easy transition as much as they are going to be very experienced and training. So those are some things you can keep in mind based on, I mean, India is not too up and down, but yes, let's say some places can get really cold and some places are always hot. And if you've always been training in hot conditions, when you go run in reasonably better conditions, you will do better. And the same, the other way around, if you've not trained in hot conditions, when you show up in a hot race, yeah, you might, you might be a little more slower than what you anticipated. That's always there. Hope that answered the questions from a couple of them which I've received. Any other questions on selections of races or in general season plan? Just want to start to touch upon some of the recent races we have done and just go through some common things I've noticed and come through. Any other questions before, or any other questions on season plan or selection of races or anything else? No? Cool.
Yeah. Deepak.
Yep.
Sridhar.
Yes, Sridhar.
There is one or two guys who are doing this Himalayan rush.
Yeah.
Triathlon. So, do you have any advices for them?
I think from what I know, it's an off-road triathlon. I remember training a few people a few years back, not last year, but before that. From what I understand, it's a little bit of an off-road try. I mean, the swim is not going to be too different. I think it's a freshwater swim, but I think the terrain will play a role. So obviously, we need to just be more comfortable with a bit of a off-road sort of setting, or at least in terms of the run, especially being trail and a bit of a hike and a climb sort of a scenario. But otherwise, I think the distances are only Olympic distance. I say only in terms of, it's going to take a lot more time to maybe go through that Olympic distance race. But I can look through the course specifically and advise. I know, isn't Arun, right? Arun is doing, from what I know.
Yeah, Arun.
Arun is, and I know he's right here. But yeah, I have trained a few people. Definitely will put him in touch with them to speak anything more. But we'll have a look at the course. Just look at the key thing is elevation wise, if there's anything going to be, and carrying this forward for other events like Philippines, right? Ironman Philippines. I was talking to the race director last month because we sort of got a map which the scale and things look bad. I said, that's a lot of climbing. So I said, either the scale is wrong or it's going to be a hilly course. And I think I spoke to the race director and they did confirm it's going to be extremely hilly and hot. So which means we have to train suitably. So in this case, for Himalayan rush, if there's anything specific, we train suitably. But otherwise, shouldn't be that hard from a because of the distance there, there might not be too much of an impact compared to a full Ironman and you having to climb 2,800 meters or 2,100 meters or whatever it may be for some of those bigger events. That's going to be significant amount of climbing.
Yeah, hi Deepak.
Hey Ankush.
Yeah, Deepak, my question is about if one individual is planning for 2 Ironman for a year.
Yep.
So between those 2 Ironmans, what would be the difference and distance? For example, if I'm planning for 2, then I have to prepare whole a year if I'm keeping those 6 months after setting, right? And if I keep them like if I'm going for 2 month of difference, then what could be the uh, uh, training plans or sort of?
Yeah, I think obviously if we have a choice, and in our case we have spoken about this and we're trying to space them out as much as we can, it always helps to, you don't have to perfectly have 6 months in between. Having 4 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months helps. There are sometimes you can even do it a little more closer. But given again, if it's going to be a first one and second one, I wouldn't advise it there. But in your case, you've done one and things, so we can space it a bit more. I remember in my case, I think the closest I've done is about 6 weeks. And in that case, what we end up doing is, obviously we go through a base building phase, we build up, we go into sort of competition or race mode, and then we peak. Obviously there's a bit of a taper. We peak at the right time, you do that race, then immediately find out what the next race is. If it's 6 months from now, we go through very standard sort of recovery of a week, 2 weeks, and then build up, and then again have that opportunity to do. But if you don't have 6 months, or we don't even have, let's say, 4 months, we just have maybe 8 weeks or 10 weeks, then that recovery week or post race, we'll have to be extremely careful. It's very common after a big Ironman, a week after that we end up going and rewarding ourselves, eating, and obviously we've been quite disciplined and things. We certainly want to just have a few free days, both mentally and physically. That happens when the races are a lot more closer, especially big events like these. The post race thing needs to be spot on, which means, yeah, we take care of ourselves. A day or two of sort of eating a few things here and there doesn't matter, but when you start having a week and 10 days of sort of being off the things, it starts impacting. So the key thing there is have a properly structured post-race recovery of that week and maintain whatever fitness is there, we still maintain that, and then we just build up again towards the next race. We've already done our biggest run and ride, right? That's the way I look at it. You've already done your big runs and things. You don't again have to do 4 more 30K runs or whatever, right? So we structure the training appropriately, and that's obviously will be taken care. But obviously rest and recovery will be the most important thing out there, and still can be done. But obviously sometimes you will notice you will have your better race in the second one or sometimes the first one if it's just too close. So that's something which is a little hard to predict. But again, 2 to 3 months, if you reasonably have a good training base and you've done a few Ironmans and things before, is definitely a minimum. But 4, 5, and 6 gives us ample amount of time to shake off. And again, obviously we'll have aggressive targets of saying I did this in particular thing, can I improve by this much time and all that, right? So it all gives us enough time. By doing so many back-to-back races, the expectation generally is improvement of time and lots of things. So body takes a while to sort of recover. So that's how we would be planning it out.
All right, thank you.
Cool. Question from Vijay. Comparing with Hyderabad Triathlon cycling course, Philippines is less hilly. Hyderabad tri max elevation was 625. Is that the overall climb, Vijay? Was that the amount of elevation gain, 625 meters? Philippines is definitely more than that. I don't know how much officially the map has been. They promised to send an updated map. If they've not, I can tell you this is straight from the race director, not the race director, actually from the person who signs off or sanctions that race from Ironman itself. It's a bloody hilly course, much more hillier than Malaysia, but nothing that we can't handle, but definitely a lot more hillier than Hyderabad or whatever it is. I mean, as an example, Malaysia is about 1,300 meters of climb, I think, or 1,200. Kona is a little more than that. Wales, there's an Ironman Wales, which is about 2,700 meters of climb over a course of 180 kilometers, which is significant, right? So I think Philippines is a little less than that. So I think it will be somewhere in the range of 2,000, which just means depends. There are going to be a lot of downhills too. So you will have an opportunity. People always come back from a cycling course and say, which one? This is a flat course. I've done Ironman Busselton 6 times, flattest course in all of Ironman, I think. Even maybe Florida, and this is one of the faster courses, but it's so flat that primarily you can almost ride the entire 180 k's without changing too many gears. It is that flat, believe me. The joke out there is the only hill or the climb you will get is the swim ramp after you get out of the swim, right? There is absolutely no hill in sight in Busselton. But what it also means is you never get a break for your legs. You're pretty much bang on, sitting right there and riding. There is no cruising. There is not even 5 or 10 seconds you will get where there's just slight downhill and you can just brake. If you want to, you can slow down, you can take a break, you can stop pedaling. But if you stop pedaling, your speed's going to drop. So you will not get, and if you're not too careful and change gears intentionally, get out of the saddle a bit and give your legs and muscles a bit of a break, you will notice that you're significantly using sort of the same parts of your muscles, and it's a hard one to run compared to even some of the hillier ones where you get a bit of a break, you go through ups and downs, a bit rolling, and you get a bit of a breather for the legs. So that's something which I've seen is a harder one to run off the bike. People might hammer themselves because it's so flat, and they try to gain 5 or 10 minutes in the bike, and then they're losing half an hour on the run because they're already walking by then. That's something. What was that, Sridhar?
About the wind factor.
Wind factor in Busselton, that's true. As much as it's a flat one, look, most races you will get, it's a 2-lap. If it's a full Ironman, it's 3 laps of 60 or 2 laps of 90. Doesn't matter which part of the world we race, wind always picks up somewhere around 10, 11, 12 o'clock, and the last 30, 40 Ks are going to be windy. In Busselton, definitely heading back into town and things, it's going to be a bit more windy, so it might be flat, but wind affects people mentally a bit more than hills. Hills, at least you can see that it's going up. Wind, you can't see, and people are like trying to just fight through it. So yes, wind is a factor in some of the races, so that's something to also keep in mind. But again, look, it could get windy on one particular day and not so on the other, so I wouldn't South Africa is a windy one. You know that it's windy, so it's important to just go down to maybe a slightly easier cadence and just get through with it. Can happen in any race, but as Sridhar is pointing out, Busselton, though it's flat and things, can get a bit more windy as compared to other races. Okay. Question from Jonas. Our IM is a hilly one. We are doing Austria, right? Specific TT bike or gear settings that we want to look at. How long does one need to practice on the TT bike? How many kilometers before the race? If we do have a road bike and a TT bike, I think quite a bit of the longer rides and at least some of the time trials I give for people, whether it's 100, 120, 150 or even 180 as we build up towards big Ironmans, the time trials definitely need to be done on a TT bike. And even when you go on a group ride, if the group's all right and they don't find it too rude that you show up on a TT bike and it's safe enough for you to just use it normally, ride the TT bike as much as you can. And in cases where you just have one bike and you've put aero bars on your road bike, then definitely you can ride as much. But the key thing is to get comfortable with that position. Or as I say, getting comfortable with the discomfort of being in that aero position and just going through. Every time you stand up off the aero bars, you're slowing down. And it's important to just stay there. So when you do rides on indoor bike trainers, use that opportunity to just get into the aero position every 2 minutes and then take a break for maybe 10 seconds, then back on. So because you will need to be in that position for close to 180 kilometers or 90 kilometers, depending on what race you're doing. So it's very important to practice that. And as much time as you can on your TT bike. So in terms of gear settings for hilly things, look, Austria, from what I notice, is not going to be too technical a hilly course. It can get a bit hilly, but you don't need to do anything different on your TT bike. Gear settings, well, look, some people would like to have maybe a 25, 28, or even 32 at the back just to get through some hills with a little more of an easier cadence. But look, unless you're doing Ironman Wales or some sort of like Ultraman Nusa, which has like crazy amount of rollers and climbs, and there is significant amount, you shouldn't have to change too much of your gear settings to manipulate or to sort of to maneuver those hills. We'll specifically look again on the course, Jonas, but I don't think we'll have to make too many changes. But yeah, definitely not on the bike. You don't have to necessarily do too many things on the bike as such. It's a TT bike, nothing much. But specifically on the gear, whether we need to just add another speed and a bit of an easier cadence to help through so that your legs are not too loaded, we'll have a look. How is IM Zurich? We're talking so much about bikes now, everyone's getting worried about hills. So everybody's throwing questions about how is IM Zurich, how is that? Zurich, from what I know, well, has a few climbs and downhills. I wouldn't be too worried at all. So yeah, again, it's in July. We know what it is, and we're training you suitably, and you're training well. So it should be all right. Key thing there is to not try to gain too much time going down and trying to gain sharp corner, trying to gain 10 seconds and coming off the bike, definitely not a good idea. So just stay safe and keep doing that. TT bike or road bike on hilly courses, example, Subic Bay or Lake Placid. Nah, TT bike still, because you can still ride the TT bike as a road bike. The only thing you can't do with a TT bike on a very hilly technical course is take sharp corners. So I think you will lose a few seconds, 4 or 5 seconds maybe in taking that corner, because it's not that easy to maneuver a TT bike compared to a road bike. In all probability, your TT bike could be a lot heavier than a good road bike, and it's not that easy to maneuver. It's been built to straight line speed and go as hard and fast as you can in a straight line speed. It's not built for all those things. That's where people say whether I should put an aero bar on a road bike or a TT bike. There will still be significant portions of straight line and things where you'll get more benefit from riding the TT bike. But if you don't have a TT bike, there will always be a road bike with aero bars. But if you have a TT bike, definitely this one. Lake Placid is hilly too, but there is significant downhill portions. So you'll gain good amount of time. I can't think of it being too technical. Even if it is, we just slow down a bit. That should be good enough. No need to switch over to a road bike street. Any other questions on race selections or anything? Otherwise, we can quickly transition towards a few points I had on some of the post-race analysis recently with in Goa Tri is quite fresh in our minds. Just checking any other questions. Yeah, good. Nitya. And from a half. How many more hours per week of training should one look for an Ironman from a half? Good question. how long before the race? How long? I would say, giving yourself 4 to 6 months. If you've reasonably already done a marathon, you've ridden enough, just that you've not trained for a full Ironman, but you've reasonably trained well and conditioning is there, 4 months is good enough time. But otherwise, as I said, 6 to 8 months is a good enough time transitioning from a half to a full after being comfortable at a half, not just started triathlon, did a half, and then in 6 months' time trying to do a full might be too much. But I think that's one thing. How many more hours? Actually, the biggest thing you will notice the jump from a half Ironman to a full Ironman is the riding, right? So we can get away by not having long rides when you're training for a half. I mean, long is a relative term. So you can always keep riding 2 hours, 2.5 hours, occasionally a three, and still be in very good shape to race a half Ironman. Even the runs, you don't need to go run 20 kilometers too often, right? Run a 14, 16s, 18s, occasionally a few 20s, and you're there. So coming back, if you look at it, it doesn't take too much time to run a 14 or a 16 and things like that. But suddenly when you're training for a full Ironman, we're starting to run a lot of 20s, 24s, 28s, occasional 30 and 32, starting to do rides of 4 hours, 5 hours. So suddenly, I think it's the weekend which suddenly you need more time. But also in the weekday, you might have to do, 2 sessions of a swim and a run, or trying to find time to do a 2.5 hour ride in a weekday, trying to do some of the medium or long runs in the weekday. And that's where, but the number of hours incrementally might just be, could just be 6 hours more or 4 to 6 hours more than what you're spending on the other one. And also closer to the race is what it will turn out to be, that one. It's not too much. It's maybe 2 to 3 hours more of riding, and most of it will turn out to be added up to one or two of those rides, and an hour more of running and an hour of swimming. That's the way we to look at it. How do you know you're building towards an Ironman if you don't sign up for one? Well, we keep riding more, we keep running more, and as long as we are conditioning our body towards, hey, I can now ride 150 Ks, I can ride 180 Ks, and I can still get off the bike and run maybe 4 Ks, 8 Ks. Look at that sort of conditioning, or go do a 100K ride and then run 20 or 24 after that, or just go ride 2 hours hard and then try to run a 24 kilometers after that. There are lots of things you can simulate to see whether we are ready for these sort of things, and then you can go and sign up. So there are always ways to find out. But if you can sort of tick a few boxes to say where the conditioning is, yeah, we go sign up and then we go after that. One more question. Hotel, gym bikes as training when people do travel. Yes, travel is a bit of work-related thing. We all have that. The gym bikes, the spin bikes, actually pretty good ones, can definitely be used for longer or definitely as training. Some of the older gym bikes would just have a very thick and a big seat. I find that extremely uncomfortable after half an hour, 45 minutes is fine, but trying to do a 3-hour ride because we couldn't do it some other time, trying to do it on that one, it's not going to be too comfortable. But otherwise, if it's a good spin bike, yeah, they double up pretty well, and can definitely use them. Okay, good. So we'll just spend a few minutes on the Goa triathlon without specifically going to individuals. I think there are a few people here who did the Goa triathlon. I'll ask them to jump in or share, but few notes are taken based on most people's post-race talk we had, and got the feedback and race reports from everybody who had done Goa triathlon. First thing was people who are not comfortable with the open water swim, the sighting and the ability to do the distance is something which came up. So obviously I think people did all the right things, trained, went there a bit early, tried to get a practice swim and all that. I was physically not down there, so I don't know if the sighting buoys where the turn-off points are, whether they were big enough for you to sight or not. So that's one thing. And again, specifically, I don't think Mohit's on the call, but there are some people do wear, obviously, I think in his case, for the next race, will be wearing sort of prescription goggles, because as much as he's sort of been able to manage most races with normal swim goggles and in swimming pools and even other races and things, I think in an open water setting, and also especially given that, I think one of the learnings for him and for us was to maybe go after some very precision prescription swim goggles, so that there is, why add another dimension, another variable to an already hard part of swimming in the open water, right? So he felt it would be okay, or we didn't know, and I think that's a big learning for us to look at that. So if any of you have that, that's something, and you do, it might not be very easily available out there, but they are available. So put an effort and get that. That will make a huge difference if some of them. That's one learning. The second is ability to breathe on both sides, which I think as much as people have been practicing, it's hard to sort of pick it up very quickly. So that's one thing where whenever people are just swimming through and you're breathing only on one side, there is no black line like in a swimming pool lane for you to correct yourself, right? Because there's a black line, because there's a wall, because there's a lane rope or whatever it is, you reasonably uh, can correct yourself or travel in a straight line. But primarily out there on the open water, if you don't have that black line, you don't know you're going straight, and the point of reference is usually too far away, right? So one of the things for us is to do is just build up our ability. You can't do that if your race is 5 days from now. Well, it's still worth an effort of putting in that, but definitely breathing on both sides, what it does, it just takes care of constantly just looking at one side. Obviously you're swimming as straight as you think you are, but you tend to drift a bit more. So by breathing on both sides, one of the things it will do is it just makes sure that the effort and push you're doing is equal on both sides, right? Just because you're bilateral breathing doesn't mean your effort will be on both sides, but it just helps to level out a bit. And by constantly practicing bilateral breathing, I think your stroke will get a little more even on both sides. That's one thing. Second is there could be races usually start around 6:30, 7 o'clock, sun's rising. It's usually at the same level. And if you're trying to breathe only on the right side and the sun's right here, a little bit of problem with that. So then you might have to just start breathing on that side. Water might get choppy. Water starts splashing on one side because the waves are coming through. That's another opportunity to just switch over, breathing a little more on the other side. Or what if they ask you to, some courses might have an anti-clockwise swim, which means, at any point of time, you're not seeing where if you're swimming clockwise, that there is a thing and that's the buoy and you're constantly looking. But if not, suddenly again, you're drifting apart. So I think bilateral breathing is something which definitely came up with respect to some of them spending a bit more time, or some of them taking a little bit of a scenic route to get to point A to point B instead of that. And that's something for us to, correct that. The other thing is obviously the anxiety of an open water swim itself, which is something we have to overcome. And one of the other things which happens is a bit of sort of hyperventilating, right? And looking at making sure that you're breathing out enough. I remember my first half Ironman. It was a sort of a mass start, and I was just standing on the shore. I just left everybody to swim. I waited 30 seconds, started to swim, and I was still out of breath. And I almost swam back to shore, but I didn't have enough time because I was an extremely slow swimmer. But just managed to just stay and go through that part. But the mistake I was doing, and I'm sure everyone is, when we get a bit of anxiety and things around it, is we are breathing in a lot but we're not breathing out. So, just start to just blow a few more bubbles in the water or whatever it is and constantly breathe out so that, you're actually able to breathe in and, just gets you a little more relaxed. And physical contact comes through, that's fine. Either you take a few seconds and let a few people go, but otherwise just have to get comfortable with the contact and don't stop or don't react every time you get a contact. And that again is something which obviously the race teaches us a lot. But I think just think of something else. What I do sometimes to get my focus back onto it, I just start counting my strokes, and takes away all the other things aside. I just focus on just counting strokes. You don't have to count to 100. You just count to 8 or 10 or 12. Start again. We're not trying to count here, right? We're just trying to do something to take our focus away from that, right? So that's what we're trying to do. So the key thing is to just relax. So some things which we saw, I think quite a few people had good swims, but obviously some of the first timers and things which did the Goa triathlon, we noticed one is trying to stay the course, which I think was hard. One, because I don't know if the sighting ones were big enough or things. And the second thing was bilateral breathing, and also to make sure that we are a little more relaxed and things in a mass start scenario. Sridhar, in Sri Lanka, we don't have the morning sun in our face. Well, we'll know that when we look at that. Can't comment right now. Obviously, that's something we do keep in mind while designing the course. But sun is usually in your eye line in most countries when you race, sometimes a little higher. It's just a matter of, it doesn't usually impact too much, but if it is, you will know exactly on Friday or Saturday by looking at it and looking at the course and things like that. It's not going to be a big deal, but if it is, we need to look at it. Kumar's question, should have for first 300 meters as you swim south to north, post that it should be fine. Well, you have your question there. Yes, they will be at a certain point and then go through. So yeah, it won't affect too much, but it's something for us to consider. In some races, it can become quite bad, but most times they do design the course suitably such that it's not. That's something as a key input everyone does take. They can't change where the sun rises, but obviously how the course has been designed, whether it's clockwise, anti-clockwise in the direction, a few things they would have kept in mind. The others, as Kumar is mentioning, is just there for the first 200, 300 meters, and after that, it is a non-factor after that. Okay. Nitya has also pointed out she uses prescription goggles for swim. That means, means need to take an extra half minute to wear my contacts in T1. Yes, but at least you're not swimming, towards Malaysia or something else. All right, so it helps to have prescription goggles. So, and use them. And yes, you will have to obviously take a bit more time to, go through in T1, but definitely worth it. Sri Lanka is not a wetsuit swim. Yes. Obviously, how does a wetsuit help? Tri-suit, wetsuit. Wetsuit are more thicker, more buoyancy, can be worn when temperature of the water is below 24. In case of Sri Lanka, it's not. So it will just be a normal swim, which again means your ability to, stay buoyant and things are still there because it's salt water, but it's a little less because you're not wearing a wetsuit. Moving on, again, staying with the Goa try, I think post the swim, you notice there's quite a bit of a climb by the time you come down towards, what is it? Is it the GMC, the Goa Medical College Road, where we start doing laps, correct? I haven't done Goa try, but I know the area and the course. So that's where I think a few of them have gone too hard. It's a hill, yes, it needs to be handled, it needs to be tackled, but we keep the effort same. Speed will drop when it comes to a hill. We just have to accept it. And if you see somebody riding past, well, good for him or good for her. But you ride your 75, 80%, whatever it is. You can't look at the speed and say, I should be riding 21 at this point, 24 at this point. No, I think you just have to ask yourself, hey, am I riding 80% sort of efforts, especially given if it was an Olympic distance, maybe 80-85%. And from there onwards, look to just get through that phase without burning too much of energy and spiking up, because once you get it up, maybe your heart rate went up and things, there's still a significant portion of the riding to be done, and at that time the legs are already going to put through. See you around, me honest, thanks. But use the hill portion to just settle down. One of the other things I've told people is, when you're riding hills, one of the questions people are asking is, do I get out of the saddle, or at what time do I get out? I've always treated hills like, look, if it's a winding 6K climb or something like that, that's different. In this case, it's not 6 kilometers. But key thing here is, unless you use your gears effectively, right? I would start with, if I need to go down to the small chain ring in the front, that's my first step to do that. Or if you feel you can stay on the big chain ring in the front and the back ones can be used because it's very slight gradient, I would do that. But in most cases, I think it's advisable to just drop down to the smaller chain ring in the front to keep up a good cadence. Try to keep the cadence same. I mean, same as in if you're riding 85-90, you can definitely ride 80-85 even in a hill if you use the right gears. If the steepness keeps increasing too much, then the key thing there is keep going down to an easier gear. Obviously, at some point, the cadence slowly, the effort starts to become a bit more, the cadence starts to drop, you look down, you don't have any more gears. Well, that's the time to just see if you can ride out. I wouldn't get out of the saddle. I would get out of the saddle only at the last point when I feel I can't ride a good, smooth cadence and I no longer have any more gears. That's the time I say, you know what, instead of my pedal strokes are no longer smooth, they're starting to become too this way. That's when I try to get off the saddle and put a few hard ones. Only if I can't get through the whole thing. If I can get through the hill seated on my saddle, I try to get through that always. But if my pedal strokes are not smooth and I don't have to I'm sitting on my saddle, but my pedal strokes are not too smooth and I still have a small portion of the hill left, get out of the saddle, get it done, but don't burn too much. It's fine. You will see a lot of people trying to show off their cycling prowess by getting out of the saddle and riding like anything. It's fine. I'm sure you'll pass them at some stage, if not on the cycling, definitely on the run, because they're just burning too much. So stay patient. And I know a few of them went a little too hard, not just on the hill, but after that. And then key point is to pace yourself for the entire 40Ks, or in this case being an Olympic distance, and then able to run 10K properly. That's something which is very important. So that's something to keep in mind in addition to hills. And the other thing, the hills, try to just, when the hill comes in, go down to an easier gear, as I said, try to just sit back a little on the saddle, just a little bit, and relax, and then ride. Relaxed hands, don't try to have too tight a thing. All the effort is coming in the legs. By sitting a little behind on the saddle, you start to engage your glutes a bit more, right? That's something which is anyway needed for all of cycling, but in this case, it just re-emphasizes a bit more and just gets you through with it. But yes, occasionally, if you're feeling too tight and things, even if a hill is not there, go down to a harder gear, even on a flat one, get out of the saddle and just for a bit of a change and things do that. Some people want to just stretch themselves and a few things. But personally, there is no need for us to get out of the saddle unless there's definitely is a need. Like I said, Busselton is so flat that you have to almost plan and consciously get out of the saddle occasionally just to give your legs a bit of a break, because they've just been in the same gear, same position for a very long time. Okay. Yeah, continuing on, just to close off on the Goa try, I think the pacing part of the bike and the run and the nutrition you take, every whatever it is, was very important for people to do, because quite a few people didn't run to their potential, mainly because they went too hard on the ride, or they didn't take care of nutrition on the ride, and they were pretty much trying to run on empty. And at that point, you taking a gel at the 4K mark of a 10K, by the time the gel really makes a difference and things, it's just too late. It's still better than not taking it, but the damage has already been done, and it's very hard for you to recover from that. So just make sure that you pace yourself properly and take care of nutrition on the bike, because how well you run will come down to those two factors in addition to how well you've trained for the run. Because there's a lot of races which have got spoiled because of trying to go a little too hard on the ride. You trying to gain 2 or 3 minutes on the ride and you lose 10 or 15 minutes on the run, right? So it's a balancing act. You will sort of know that a little bit in training when I give you brick workouts and I still tell you run a particular pace and take 30 seconds break after a kilometer. There's a reason for that. We try to run a particular pace and see if we can keep that up. And that's a good sign for us to know that if I was able to run X after a hard ride, then what sort of pace I can really run, or what pace I can ride so that I can run effectively, right? So it always comes down to the run. I mean, as much as triathlon is swim, bike, and run, you will notice, any top age group, podiums, anything you look at it, or in general, for people to have a good experience, it will come down to the run. And that's where we need to be. We don't need to be conservative on the bike, but if conservative is the word which helps you to pace yourself, then primarily stick to that. If that's the word which helps you to stay in the zone and work a particular pace, do that. Because I mean, my best runs have come where I have still ridden hard, but not like crazy hard. I mean, riding 180 Ks and then getting off the bike and saying, all right, now let's go run a marathon is not going to be easy. And I think Bustleton again, I think my best run in a Ironman has been a 3 hours 21. And I've had good rides for that. I've had a few better rides in the last few Ironmans, but I've never been able to run a 321. So maybe it also is that balancing act that I'm just pushing maybe a little more harder on the bike and it's affecting my run maybe, and I'll continue to find it. But look, that's why it's a good thing. There are some people who are strong in swim, some on bike, some on run. It all doesn't even out completely, but it makes it interesting on the day. So just stay in check and ask yourself, assess it to say, hey, can I keep this pace for this cycling pace for the next X kilometers, whatever is left in your race? Keep asking that yourself every 5Ks, 10Ks, and then ask yourself, I need to remind yourself that you need to run a marathon, you need to run a half marathon. That will help to, moderate your pace pretty much. Okay. We also had, I think, Auroville Marathon, I think, which is again a bit, starts in the dark, is a nice trail run, bit of an uneven thing. So one of the other things for us to keep in mind is like the terrain, if you're running anything which is a little more of a unevens or trails or anything else, just staying a little more aware of where our feet is landing, and also to feel comfortable of running through. That's one more thing which I think but Auroville, again, I think Aarti or a few others are in the call. I'll let them add on, but I don't find that to be too different from any other one. It's a beautiful course, but I don't think from a surface perspective or other things, it's not too different in terms of preparation or anything else. But obviously, starting in the dark and sort of not knowing where your feet's landing is always a bit tricky. It sort of makes it hard to run naturally. But I think that's something which is looking at it. Yeah. So there have been a few people who have sort of twisted their ankles or other things, or small things like that. But yeah, people love Auroville. It's a nice place, so I'm sure people will continue to go there. But yeah, just stay safe. I remember running the Hyderabad Marathon. I think it was dark and not knowing, sort of where my feet's landing was a bit hard. But after a while, you have people in the front, and things. People are just there. You just sort of run well after that. Yeah, good to run. Headlight, torches. People carry a few things. You get small little, things you can wear on the head with a little bit of a light pointing down. Very common for sort of, ultras or off-road and trail runs and hikes and things like that. Quite a good one to use. I do have one. Also useful in transition when it's very dark at 5 a.m. and you're trying to fiddle around. So yeah, that's some of the things, especially on the Goa triathlon. I want to look at it. Obviously, it was hot and humid, and we sort of knew that building in and taking care of nutrition also in Goa. I think I was very happy. I think most of them pretty much nailed whatever transition, whatever nutrition and hydration get sort of worked through, in training and execute that on race day. So yeah, let me just pause and see if there's anything else which people wanted to touch upon. No? Good. Alrighty then. I hope you found this session useful. Trying to make this sort of every Sunday. Please share your feedback, comments, and also what are the topics you would like to talk. And I think it'll help to make it a bit more interactive than me just, me only one talking for a long time. I'm trying to also get a few other experts starting March who can also maybe, jump in, contribute, or a few things in addition to also hearing from you people. So please do share your feedback, comments, and any topics you would like to, look at it. And then the other thing is we will also be doing some shorter ones. And I'm also trying to start from next Wednesday. I'll anyway send a note out, but just letting you know because we are here, of a virtual or a online bike trainer session. So primarily whoever have a bike and a trainer setup will try to execute an online class. I've done that in the past, just want to bring that back in. I think we'll be on Wednesdays. So I'm just trying to align everyone's plans a bit more so that it's not too disruptive for what people were supposed to do on Wednesday. But we will be doing, and it's just like a spin class or a gym session. I mean, an online group bike class, just that you're at home, I'm on the side, and I'm making sure that you're doing your workouts. And I'll be doing the workout with you. So I'll send a note out, but thanks again for taking the time. And please, if you have any comments, mail me. And also, I'll upload this on YouTube for people who missed it. They will watch it. But also do put your comments out there on YouTube. It'll just help us to promote and encourage a few more people to attend and take this forward. Thank you, everyone. You have a good evening. Thanks. Vijay, I will call you.
Deepak, few minutes with you.
I will call you, Sridhar.
Okay.